Origin Unexplained.
Welcome to Origin Unexplained, where the weird gets weirder and the abnormal is our norm. I am Sue and I am your host, and this is Origin Unexplained. Have you ever stood near something and just know that something's watching you? I don't mean paranoia, I mean presence. That kind of stillness where your bones feel it before your brain does. Well, that's what we're talking about today, and that is Mt Shasta. An absolutely awesome topic. Lots of stories. I think a lot of stuff's been added in, but here nor there, there's bits and pieces that are scientific. So, who knows? So, without any further ado, it's not just a mountain, it's actually a beacon, kind of like a vortex. A lighthouse for things we don't have names for and maybe never will. And let me tell you something. The stories around this place, they don't fade over time. They just get louder. So we're going to start off with some bizarre theories, but who knows? The Lemurian thread. Okay, so let's start with the Lemurians, because for some folks, this is where it all begins. So legend says that an ancient race of survivors from Lemuria, the lost continent, that supposedly sank into the Pacific before Atlantis ever had a name, these weren't primitive cave dwellers. They were technologically advanced, spiritually evolved, and when their world went under, they didn't die off. They moved underground, so some say, right into the massive network of lava tubes under Mt Shasta. So when I say lava tubes, we're talking about tunnels into a mountain that was a volcano at one time. And that is what they claim. Now, people say that they actually still live there and that they walk among us. And they are appearing and disappearing at will. They're supposedly white-robed figures glowing softly. And that their eyes seem older than time itself, I guess. They don't speak like us, and they don't move like us, but supposedly they are watching. Now, some say they have crystal tech that bends reality. Others say that their real reason, well, we've never gotten satellite imaging, is because under that mountain, something's in there, creating chaos. Now, do I believe all that? I believe people experience it, and I believe something down there holds memory and holds presence. Because the stories keep coming and they don't get any smaller by any means. Not just once or twice, not just from YouTubers looking for views. I'm talking geologists, hikers, rangers, and even the military. They see things and they feel things. So that is one of the stories. Now, the disappearances. Now let's shift it a little bit. Because people don't just see things around Mount Shasta, some of them do go missing. And I'm not talking about tourists wandering off trails either. Kids, adults, even solo hikers. Some vanish in broad daylight, a few steps ahead of their group, and never to be seen again. Others turn up hours or days later, barefoot, confused, saying they saw lights or heard voices underground, or actually lost time entirely. Now, there was a story that one kid that was 3 years old went missing near Panther Meadow. He was gone for hours, and search teams were out looking for him, dogs, helicopters, the works. Then he was found, and he was found clean and calm. He says he was taken into a cave by another version of his grandmother who looked just like her, but was not her. That is one of the most popular stories, but we'll get into some more of those bizarre stories later on too. Now, the sounds that are underground, if you talk enough to locals, they'll tell you sometimes at night that the mountain actually hums of a frequency. Not like a wind hum, a low, almost mechanical vibration. Sometimes people report hearing music. Sometimes they hear what sounds like chanting that's deep and far off, kind of like monks echoing through stone. But there are no monks on Mount Shasta, at least not the kind that we know of. If you stand near one of the lava tube tunnels, the entrance at night, you'll swear that the air is vibrating. You'll feel it before you actually hear it. Now, some have even claimed that they followed those sounds and ended up somewhere else. The lights changed and it was like time actually warped. So what I mean by lights is the sky, the sky with the moon or whatever. Lighting, if it's during the daytime, it could be sunny, and then it's not so sunny. These aren't fantasy stories. These are actually experiences, and most people who go through it have claimed that it was an actual real thing, and they don't tell anybody. That's the interesting part. They don't tell anybody. Remember, the wiser man doesn't always run off at the mouth, except for maybe one person they might tell. On a podcast like this, for example. Now, here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. The government knows, or something does. Why do you think so many areas around that mountain are restricted, fenced off, or mysteriously closed due to quote-unquote weather conditions, even when there's no storm in sight? Why do helicopters run drills with no markings? Why did military personnel sweep that area back in the Cold War or so, the old-timers claim? I can tell you they are not looking for hikers. They're watching the doors, the entrances, and the energy. I'm pretty sure of it. But then again, that's my opinion. Why? Because Mt Shasta doesn't just hold myths. It's supposed to hold access. So now there's been, tales of portals, lights, and crossroads. And Mt Shasta's been called a dimensional gateway. Have you ever heard of the Shasta light? Multiple people have reported giant glowing orbs hovering near the summit. Could be blue lights, maybe green lights. Sometimes they're darting and sometimes they're just sitting there and they're pulsing. You can't really track them, and you can't film them, which is bizarre. Most people just stare, and then they're gone. So some say that it's ETs, and others say that it's actually interdimensional. Others say that it's like a technology from way older civilizations. Technology kind of that lets people shift between layers of reality, like kind of pulling a curtain. In those caves? Some think they don't just lead underground, that they fade out, like phase out to somewhere else entirely. Kind of like a non-linear time and space. And yet, despite all this, all the witness accounts, the missing people, the physical phenomena, stuff you don't see, the documentaries blown wide open, you don't see real investigations funded, and why? Because Mt Shasta doesn't belong to the average person anymore. It belongs to the stories, the silence, and the gatekeepers. And they're not talking. So, one couple, and the guy was a geologist and she was a psychic, had told me that when they entered one of the hidden tubes, one of the tunnels, everything changed. Time, sound, light, and so on. The rock walls actually gave off a low pulse. Their watches skewed. His compass spun. She said she saw beings at the edge of her vision, kind of in your peripheral. Tall, robed, silent beings. And when they turned to follow, the light closed behind them, and there was no doors, no stone shutters, just stone sealing itself. Now, there was another guy who vanished on Gray Bayou, and that is one flank of Mt Shasta, and it has trails that look innocent enough, the lush trees, the wildflowers, the vista points, and all that. And the man that I talked to was hiking alone, and at midday he felt a shift in the air. And the forest went quiet, and birds even stopped chirping. And in the distance, apparently, he saw a floating orb that was translucent, and it was blue and white, and it was just above the tree line. Now, he said that it had followed him kind of like curiously, but when he got under it, it was like the forest actually opened up and there was a cave mouth, and he'd never noticed a tunnel entrance tucked behind the vines. He walked inside, and minutes had passed, and he turned around and the entrance was gone. And the rocks where the mouth should be were covered in moss. And he broke out hours later, but didn't know how far he went. There was no map, no trail, no memory of turns, so to speak of, and just a strong sense of something trying to show me where it is. Now that is bizarre. Now, another friend, and this is a woman who spends summers in Shasta County, has reoccurring vivid dreams, and when she stood near the base, or even relaxed and sat down, sometimes she would nod off. She dreamt of mirror-like water, floating geometric shapes, and above it and under it, underwater, like passages. I guess she claimed that there was underwater passages from what she saw, and that the lake wasn't actually real. So she woke up wet and sweaty, and her heart was racing from the dream and stuff. But she does always go back the next season, and she says there's like a magnetism there, like the place calls her. And often in those dreams, she sees a pale figure by the water's edge, wearing white, carrying something like a crystal. Now, stories have it that a child was in the meadow, and years back, a 5-year-old was playing with his parents at Panther Meadow. And then on one of the Shasta trails, according to the parent, the child wandered off behind a clump of trees, and when they called for him, they found him standing at a small volcanic fissure, and he was pointing with his eyes wide. He said he saw a lady in silver walking toward a rainbow door. He wouldn't describe it anymore, and hours later, when pressed, the child had no idea how he got back to the path. He didn't panic or anything. He just said, she said, not yet. How creepy is that? Now, as far as spiritual and energetic frameworks and stuff and what people believe about Shasta, well, it kind of helps to know what the frameworks are, because when you show people the weird light phenomena or talk about dreams, they kind of need a language that they understand. So these are the belief systems that many Shasta seekers use. Ley lines are actually earth energy nodes, and some believe Shasta sits at the convergence of invisible power lines on the planet's grid, and we've often talked about the grid. A lot of people talk about ascended masters and star beings, which are spiritual teachers, and they have said to transcend physical form from using places like Shasta as outposts or contact points. Then people talk about interdimensional portal gateways, which are passages between our reality and others. Dimensional shift, whatever. These might align with geographical features like tunnels, cave rooms, underground springs, even subterranean chambers. Then you have the ones that talk about the past civilizations, the Lemurians, the Atlanteans, hyper-advanced cultures that existed before recorded history, and leftover echoes in the rocks in consciousness and in subterranean chambers. And then, of course, we have the people who study Shasta deeply and often talk of the mountain as a teacher, not as some metaphor, like the mountain literally teaches, either through dreams, visions, sudden revelations, and reminders. And for many, being around it, it's actually like a transformative experience, and some even dangerous. So now, there's always been talk of secrets, silences, and cover-ups. Now, what's odd is how quiet it is whenever something big happens, and it could be with anything today, right? Missing persons, they're rarely connected publicly to the underground narratives, even when witnesses whisper about the caves. Media picks up the overt stuff like lights, UFO reports, even the strange logs, but rarely the hard claims, bodies, portals, or tunnels that disappear. They don't often talk about that sort of stuff, and that's probably due to the fact that mainstream people cannot handle it. So, local governments sometimes issue a trail closed due to rockfall or access suspended for safety without giving a reason, even when no public hazards are visible. Now there are rumor threads of property owners being quietly pressured to keep access paths unrecorded, tunnels unsurveyed, and tunnels sealed and forgotten. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about the robed guardian and the cleansing chamber, and this is probably the most hot story that's ever come from there. So, here's the story, and yeah, you might say it's urban legend, but people swear on it, about a guy who found one of the hidden tunnel openings. Now, out of the base of Mt Shasta is where this hidden tunnel was. Now, this guy wasn't some camper or crystal hiker, and he wasn't even looking for anything spiritual. He was just hiking and saw a break in the rock wall, and curiosity pulled him in like anybody would do. What he found wasn't just a tunnel. It curved in a weird way, like the tunnel was built, not carved by nature. The stone was smooth, actually too smooth, as he claimed. And at the end of the tunnel, he actually met someone. So a man in a long robe, and not white, not gold, not flashy, just something simple, supposedly was standing silently at a kind of archway. It was like a gate, but it was made of like a living stone. Can you imagine? The man didn't speak, not out loud anyway, but the hiker knew. He was being told, you can't go any farther yet. He was brought into this chamber, and he said that it wasn't lit, but he could see everything clearly. He said that there were these walls lined with what looked like crystalline veins pulsing with like a dull blue light, and that the air was thick and metallic and almost livable, alive, and then it hit him. He said this chamber wasn't just a room, it was a detox chamber. Not for his skin, not like a spa, anything like that. This thing was meant to clear toxic heavy metals and electromagnetic buildup from the body. Now, the kind of crap that we all carry around, that mercury stuff, our radiation exposure, even residual frequencies from like our technology and Wi-Fi and stuff like that. He said that his skin actually itched and his teeth buzzed. He said he felt like something was being sucked out of him. Now later he described it like a spiritual quarantine, almost like a cleansing, but not symbolic, more physical and biological. If he wanted to go deeper through that arched gateway, this was his so-called price. However, that never did happen. He said that the man in the robe shook his head and that the tunnel was closed behind him, and when he turned to look back, it was all different. Yeah. So, some of the stories are extremely bizarre from there. And I'm going to get a little bit more in depth for those that just believe that it's all Lemurian and things like this. Now, it's not just Lemurians, obviously, that would live under Mount Shasta, just like we don't have one particular nationality, I guess, that lives on top. What I'm saying is this, that the Lemurians are the ancient survivors of Mu, so they claim, and there are Telos, yeah, and that's the city inside the mountains, so you have the Telosians, and that's the ones that call the inner earth or whatever home. And that whole story folds into Agartha and a wide inner earth network, and there's like a literal tunnel portal system in that lore, and all the facts like the highways between those hidden civilizations and all that exciting stuff. Now, on top of that, in some versions, there's other cosmic players that are like Pleiadian emissaries and other starseed types who supposedly act as like the diplomats and the inner Earth guardians who stand watch and keep the uninvited humans out. So you've got people or beings like Lemurians, Telosians, in places like Telos and Agartha, passageways, tunnels, portals, and quote-unquote emissaries or guardians mediating the access. Rumor channelings and conspiracy all mixed together here, like a lost continent, part of the Hollow Earth tunnel map, whatever, part of New Age telepathy maybe. So that's a whole episode by itself, and yeah, maybe we'll save that deep dive for another episode. Okay, so now that you have that down, I want to throw in, well, some theories, maybe of my own, I guess. Now, just the fact that they claim that there's an entire underground city with chambers, hallways, ships, technology, and maybe even otherworldly frequencies and stuff, you do have to ask, wouldn't that kind of system need to vent air somewhere? I mean, you're going to need fresh air, right? So I was thinking of those clouds and stuff, and I mean, seriously, I asked myself, wouldn't that alone cause those ventricular clouds? Wouldn't that pressure and energy have to escape somewhere, probably right near the top of the mountain, right? So we know that like ventricular clouds, those big stacked flying saucer looking clouds, form when moist air hits a barrier and flows upward in like waves. And that happens with mountains and stuff too, I guess. But that's the mainstream explanation. That's fine. But if you've got something inside the mountain, like heat, moisture, vibrations, even artificial systems running down there, why wouldn't that be affecting the air patterns above it, right? And that's the part that gets overlooked all the time because everyone's focused on what's below. But what if the evidence is above too, staring us in the face? What if those clouds actually are more than just weather? Think about it. What if they're an exhaust or camouflage? Who knows? I'm not ruling out UFOs. But because in places like Shasta, the sky isn't just sky. It's like a lid. It's a curtain. You look at those clouds, and that's exactly what it looks like. And maybe it lives just long enough to let something out. Air. Who knows? Well, we'll come back to that whole system and ventilation theory and tunnels and what might be powering it all in another episode. But, keep your eyes open on those clouds. They may not just be floating. They may be breathing. But I also want to stress, too, that the mountain ranges that have those ventricular clouds continually on and off are Mt Shasta, the Andes down in South America, Mount Rainier, and the Swiss Alps. And what do they all have in common besides being mountains? UFO activity. They all have had UFO activity, and the Swiss Alps, is just like Mount Shasta, except they talk about creatures living deep in the Alps. So I find that interesting, that the places that do have these ventricular clouds and stuff all have UFO activity that's been mentioned in media and everywhere else. So what do I think about a lot of this? I think that there are some stories that really are questionable, but I also think a lot of people have taken and added to these stories like a lot of them do so they can make money off from it or be noticed, But at any rate, so if you plan on going there, record everything. I would suggest recording via video or recorder, so you're getting audio recordings. Take notes of the temperature drops, auditory issues you may have, high-pitched things, numbness in the ears, stuff like that. Maybe you have like weird, bizarre things like light and stuff changing, or shifts in time or perception. Maybe you get from one spot to another in like, wow, seconds. And any kind of thoughts, or if you're staying down below or staying somewhere, even your dreams. So if you ever find yourself out there standing on that rock, staring up at the cloud and kissing that summit, ask yourself this: what is beneath your feet? Is it just stone or something ancient? Is it something breathing, or is something waiting? This is Origin Unexplained. Thanks for hanging out here. You can find us on pretty much all social media platforms under Origin Unexplained, UNX, no E there, PLAINED. That is Origin Unexplained, and you can also email us at originunexplained@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll be back soon with another podcast.
Origin Unexplained.